You've spelunked into the Matt Cave.
Hello, everybody, and welcome into another episode of the Matt Cave. Thank you all so much for spelunking on by. This week, there's no more football to be talked about. I'll give my Super Bowl preview prediction when the teams are set, and it'll be next week, actually, that I'll give my prediction, because the week after that is the Super Bowl. So there you go. That will be in the pipeline. But this week, I will be talking about the Utah Jazz, their players that I think will be moved before the trade deadline in a couple of weeks. And then I'll also talk about the Utah Hockey Club missing out on a trade that I wanted to see happen, but I didn't think it was realistic, but I still wanted to see it. But I'll talk about that. And then some quick blurbs about the BYU and University of Utah men's basketball teams and the different trajectories that they're looking to be on if recent trends can be followed, which is never the case in men's basketball anymore. But I'll talk about that. And then lastly, a return to video games. For the first time in it feels like 2 months, I will be giving a review of one of my all-time favorite video game series, Dynasty Warriors. They came out with a new game. I've been playing it like crazy, and I'll give my review on that and give some history about it as well. But that is to come. First, thank you all so much for being here. I truly mean that. If you could do me a favor, rate, review, like, subscribe, thumbs up, wherever it is, however you're listening, I greatly appreciate you. Any sort of feedback, any sort of movement or activity really feeds those different algorithms really well, and it helps out a ton. So thank you so much for doing that. You can still find me on Facebook. I'm still waffling on if I'm keeping that page around. If I don't, then I don't really have a way to communicate with you all except for my YouTube. So we'll see what happens. But that is still there, the Matt Cave Podcast. You can find me on Facebook, and then Matt Cave Podcast, all one word, on YouTube. And then on Twitch, I'm thinking I'll be coming back in February-ish when I get more comfortable at my adult job. That is twitch.tv/Matts, M-A-T-T-S, Cave. All right, so let's dive into things. Let's start with the Utah Hockey Club. Let's do that. So recent results are very promising. Before, it was kind of a nightmare, and it still is a nightmare when the club plays at home, but they have a 2-game home winning streak. I know. Crazy, right? But they've looked pretty good. I mean, they shut out the Wild. They beat the Jets at home, but then they lost to the Jets in Winnipeg. Same score, both sides, which is kind of funny. They beat the Blues at home, which is funny for me because that's one of my best friend's favorite teams, so it's always funny when that happens. And they look pretty good these past 5 games. Even against the Rangers, they kept it pretty close through most of the game, and against the Canadiens too. But losing at home, I don't know what's going on. And it's not just the Utah Hockey Club, the Jazz, but the Jazz stink. They're expected to lose. But the Jazz lose at home a lot too. So maybe this season the Delta Center is just cursed. Maybe it's because all of these commentators are just calling it Delta Center and not the Delta Center. I don't know. Maybe that's it. And that's caused a pall to come down over the arena and has made things not go the way they're supposed to. But looking at the Utah Hockey Club as constructed right now, I'm still sticking by my preseason pick of them making the playoffs, but I'm getting very nervous about it. They need to make a move. And it doesn't have to be a big splash. I'm going to talk about the big splash that just happened, but they need something. They need a kick in the pants is what they need. With Sergei being out and John Marino coming back, which is just funny timing on the outside looking in. The 2 stud defensemen you were expecting to lead your team all season can't get on the ice at the same time. Well, that's kind of funny. Clayton Keller getting a puck to the face, needing stitches, and then coming back and scoring a goal. That's a hockey player right there, through and through. And then the goalies. Listen, I know the club fans love Veggie. I do. Vejmelka. Him and Connor Ingram make the most frustrating gaffes when it comes to playing goalie in the NHL. And yes, I know I'm spoiled. I grew up watching Martin Brodeur, Patrick Waugh. I grew up watching the best of the best to ever play goalie. So I am spoiled. But even Ryan Miller, to a certain extent. is an upgrade over these guys. So there's not going to be a change in goal because there's no goalies like available that the club could realistically go get. But I think that's something that needs to be addressed in the offseason. Goal scoring. Where are the goals coming from is really what it boils down to. Because for a while there, Utah was only scoring 2 goals a game. And in today's NHL, that's not going to win you anything. Recently, they've picked up the scoring 4, 5, 4. But then, you have your losses, which are 2, 3, 3, 1. That's kind of where we're at. Clayton Keller has taken the goal-scoring lead from Dylan Guenther by 1 goal, and Dylan Guenther's been out for a month and a half, or at least that's what it feels like. 17 goals is the top scorer for Utah. Contrast that with the Winnipeg Jets, who their top scorer has 27. That's a full 10 goals clear of Utah's top scorer. So Utah needs offense. And the good news is there's a lot of good offensive options out there on the trade market. The Rangers look like that they're going to be on a fire sale. Canadians as well could be headed that direction. There are some teams that are dealing with salary cap issues where they won't be able to keep everybody, so they want to get them out before they lose everything. They don't want to be the next Los Angeles Angels and Shohei Ohtani. I'm never going to get over that. And that's really where we're at with Utah. What I wanted to see, and it was always a pie-in-the-sky dream of mine, was Bill Armstrong, the GM of Utah Hockey Club, and Ryan Smith going hard after Mikko Rantanen of the Colorado Avalanche, my other favorite team. So what happened is the way that Colorado is currently constructed is they are paying a lot of big bucks to a lot of guys who deserve it. And right now, the way it's constructed, they can't afford to give Mikko Rantanen the contract he deserves. The sides tried to come together on an agreement. Couldn't happen. Now, he's traded. What I wanted was Utah to jump in there and get him. Utah has the draft capital to do it. But what Utah doesn't have is a player that they're willing to part with that would help Colorado win now. And that's what they got in their deal with Carolina and Chicago. So what happened in this trade was Colorado sent out Mikko Rantanen and a couple of draft picks to Carolina, and they got back Jack Drury and Martin Necas. Now, I'm not expecting you to know either guy. What you need to know is both guys can help the Avalanche win this season. They slot in pretty nicely. Obviously, you're never going to replace a superstar like Rantanen, but they got pieces that will slide into place that could help them with both depth as well as just win now mentality. What Carolina got from Colorado was obviously Mikko Rantanen, and then they also got Taylor Hall, another guy I wanted Utah to go get from the Chicago Blackhawks. So this was a 3-team deal. The Blackhawks got nothing, really. They got a couple of draft picks, but overall, Colorado did what they could, and I don't think Utah could have been a good trade partner for them, just because there was nobody that Utah was willing to part with that would help Colorado win now. It's unfortunate. I wanted Mikko Rantanen. I also wanted Taylor Hall. Taylor Hall was a very, very good player about 6 years ago now. 7 years ago. And he's still a very solid veteran. He was brought into Chicago to help out with their young core, building them up. Things are not going to plan in Chicago, and I really hope that doesn't happen here in Utah. And so they shipped him out because he was on an expiring contract as well. So all of this to say, this was one of my pie-in-the-sky dreams, was to get Mikko Rantanen away from Colorado in a big 3-team trade. But unfortunately, it didn't happen. So that's one of the things that I wanted Utah Hockey Club to do. That's not to say the Utah Hockey Club is not busy in the trade waters. They are contacting teams left and right. They're on the phone with Ottawa about one of the guys that they're trading away. They're on the phone with the Rangers, like I said. They're on the phone with anybody. They want to upgrade this team. They know they want to strike while the iron is hot. And the iron's not going to be very hot for very long, maybe a season or two. When they need that big upgrade, that'll get them there. There will also be big players in the free agent market come next offseason. Now that the players have had time to see what Utah is as a hockey market It's one of the 10 clubs in the NHL to sell out every home game. So it's a good environment for these players to come play. It's just right now, it's really hard because they rattle off 3 straight wins and then they give you a dud. And that's just youth. So here's to hoping. I mean, Clayton Keller has 36 assists. He just needs somebody to get the puck to. All right, enough on that. So let's look at the standings in the NHL real quick. Utah Hockey Club is currently sitting in the Western Conference in the Central Division, near the bottom. Third up from the bottom. They are currently 6 points out from a playoff spot in the wild card behind the Calgary Flames, which they've had pretty good success against this season. The big bugaboo that is striking the Utah Hockey Club is that home record. If they could have brought that home record up to even what the Anaheim Ducks are doing at home, they would be in the wild card position. That's how tight it is for the wild card right now. Obviously, that will change as we go through the season. Hopefully, they don't fall apart like they did when they were in Arizona last season, where they were pretty much in this same spot, and then they rattled off a month's worth straight of losses. So hopefully that doesn't happen. But with Sergei out and Gunther out, holding our breath. But I do also want to say, before I switch topics here, having Spicy Tuna back has given a jolt in the energy of the team, and they're also hitting more. I have noticed that since Spicy Tuna has come back, Liam O'Brien. Let's keep him up, shall we? Because they need that energy. He's not a top 6 lineman, which is your first 2 lines, but he is that energy guy that every team needs, and the club definitely needs him. All right, switching gears, going to the NBA and the Utah Jazz. So the Utah Jazz are losing again. I had a couple of scary moments there where they rattled off 2 straight wins twice against Eastern Conference teams both times. So if the Jazz would just play the Western Conference teams, I think we'd be fine, honestly, because they can't buy a win against the West. But against Eastern Conference teams, they do well enough. I think the majority of their wins have come against Eastern Conference teams. But that's easy to say because they only have 10 wins, right? So let's talk about trade market and what's going on there, which players are moving, which players won't be moving, and a sigh of relief from me. So the sigh of relief, I'll start there, comes from Jordan Clarkson not having a Jordan Clarkson type season this year. He was very interesting to teams at the beginning of this season because he is instant offense off the bench. He's proven that year after year being in Utah. But this year, his shooting percentages are down overall. Like, he's below 40% from 3. He's below 45% from the field, which really tanks his trade value. And he still has 2 years left on his contract. So that makes me happy because that means he's staying in Utah. All things considered, I'm 95% sure he's staying in Utah. Unless he goes on a tear these next 2 weeks, I think he's staying in Utah. So who does that leave for the Jazz on the trade market? Well, obviously John Collins. Ever since he was traded to Utah from the Atlanta Hawks, everybody has been wondering, myself included, all right, when are they going to flip him? I think this is the year that they're going to flip him because he's shooting incredibly well from the field as well as from 3, above 50% from the floor, above 40% from 3, and above 90% from the free throw line. But the problem is his defense. He can't really play center or the 5 on defense. He struggles mightily in that role. He's more of a stretch 5, which means he plays on the perimeter. He's very quick. But when it comes to, the ground and pound in the paint, he's not your guy. So playoff teams, and we saw this as Jazz fans a few years ago, playoff teams will isolate that player to death. Death by 1,000 cuts in the playoffs. So the Jazz will probably move him. The name that is going everywhere, crosswise, upside down, and silly, is Colin Sexton. He's having a very good year. His problem is that he's not tall enough for his style of play. And that has been the same thing that has been said of many guards in the past. Chief among them, Allen Iverson, Derrick Rose, guys like that. But those who are Hall of Famers, whereas Colin Sexton is still playing. Colin Sexton tries really hard on defense. And that's not a sentence you want to hear when you're in the NBA. That's what you hear in junior jazz or in Pee Wee leagues, or it's like, oh, well, he tries really hard. That's a good thing, though. That shows he cares, right? That shows he wants to get better. He's still really young, too. I think he's like 24, which means he can still get better on defense. So it's his size on defense, but then it's also his three-point shooting. Obviously, in the NBA today, it's all about three-point shooting. He's not the best at it. High 30%, low 40% three-point shooter. That's not what you want from a smaller guard. Colin Sexton is in the mold of a Dwayne Wade or an Allen Iverson, where you drive in, you get your points, you get the and ones. That's his style. That doesn't really flow with a lot of these playoff teams because they want their guards to shoot from three. They don't need people cutting to the hoop because they've got wings who can do that. Like the Grizzlies, for example, have Jaren Jackson Jr. who can do that. They don't need another guy like that because they have Ja Morant as well. So that's the problem with these pieces the Jazz are trying to move. The other name that has been creeping up is Walker Kessler. And I find that one interesting, more so because the market is lacking in big men that are able to be moved, but it's also lacking in big men that are any good. Walker Kessler is still on his rookie deal, so that's easy for salary matching purposes in the trade market. But the Jazz don't really want to get rid of him. For good reason. He's very good. He's one of the better centers in the league. And the Jazz don't want to give him up. So they would have to be blown away. And seeing these articles from I'm getting tired of ESPN. I think ESPN is what's wrong with sports. Okay? ESPN treats small to medium market teams as feeder teams for their favorites in New York, Boston, Miami, and Los Angeles. Everybody else is playing for scraps, according to them. And this kind of dovetails off of my rant last week about the Los Angeles Dodgers and MLB. But it's the same thing. ESPN is lauding the Dodgers, and they're not saying anything about anything else. And so it's the same thing with these articles I'm reading on ESPN. And it doesn't matter who's writing them. It's the Lakers should go after Walker Kessler, and here's why. Well, the Lakers don't have anything the Jazz want. They don't have young guys that they're willing to give up, and they have 0 draft picks. They have 1 that they can move over the next decade. That doesn't move the needle for the Jazz. So no, the Jazz will not be trading Walker Kessler to the Lakers. And it's the same thing with teams like Cleveland, Minnesota, New York Knicks, like all these other teams. They don't have anything the Jazz want. Because the Jazz are turning the corner on the rebuild here. They've got enough young guys, and they've got enough picks. The trade with Phoenix really shines a light on their thinking. They want to accelerate this. And so what they're doing is they don't need all of these draft picks. They don't need, 16 rookies over the next 5 years? They don't need that. They need to consolidate those picks, which they did masterfully with Phoenix, who is trying to get stuff together to trade for Jimmy Butler. And so that's what the Jazz are doing. They're trying to accelerate this rebuild because they have a coach who can do it. Now they just need veterans to kind of slot in. Lauri Markkanen's already sick of it. He's already sick of the tanking. He's already sick of the rebuild, the retooling, whatever you want to call it. He's sick of it. And I get it. Patty Mills is as well, and he's only been here for 6 months, if that long. So what the Jazz need to do is stop being sellers, at least with their veterans. The veterans you need some sort of veteran crew in there to teach the young guys how to play in the NBA. And so the Jazz, I think, are going to be very active this trade deadline. Get rid of John Collins, probably. Keep Jordan Clarkson. Maybe get rid of Colin Sexton just because he doesn't quite fit in the timeline of the rebuild. And get back maybe draft capital, but I would assume more so in expiring contracts and maybe some draft capital so that they can ignite this rebuild, a la the Oklahoma City Thunder. But we'll have to see. All right, so that does it for the Jazz. Obviously, standings check. They are the second worst record in the NBA behind the Washington Wizards. But with what the NBA is doing with the lottery, they take into account not just the record, but your point differential, which means how competitive are you in your losses. And right now, the Wizards are a minus 14.3 point differential, and the Jazz are only 7.2, which means when it comes down to it, the Jazz will probably have, if not the best odds, among the best odds to get the number 1 overall pick, or at least to get 1 or 2, which is really important in this draft. It wasn't last year. It is this year. All right, let's move on now to BYU men's basketball and the University of Utah men's basketball. So, obviously, they met in the Holy War. A little bit different in basketball. But Utah came out on top 73-72 in overtime. Coach Kevin Young said it was a very weird game. It always is. It always is, Coach. It's a rivalry game. I know you're kind of new to college basketball. It's a rivalry game. It's going to be weird. You have to be ready for that. And his team wasn't. Fair. It's a young team. Since that game, BYU has blown out 2 opponents. Colorado, which is expected, they're at the bottom of the Big 12. But Cincinnati was picked towards the top of the Big 12 this season. That has not worked out. They're 12-7 overall, 2-6 in conference. Yeesh. But BYU blew out both of them. They're looking to be on the right trajectory. Igor Demon, his big bugaboo is turnovers. He said he was trying to get used to the speed of the game. It's not something you really want to hear from a one-and-done guy, but here we are. It looks like he's starting to get comfortable on the floor and with his teammates, which is really important because there's only, 13 games left this season, not counting tournaments. So I would hope he's getting there. Everybody's looking to next year. I'm looking to this year. I want to see what Kevin Young can do without a superstar player, without the world looking at him, because this is the foundation-building year. Can you coach? Obviously, the guy can recruit. That's easy. That's easy to say, easy to see. Can he coach? Right now, Richie Saunders is the leading scorer for BYU men's basketball at 14.9. Let's call it 15 points a game. Igor Demon has 6 points per game, but his turnovers are almost 3 a game at 2.6. That's a 2-to-1 ratio. Ideally, for your ball handler and your spark on offense, you want that to be 3-to-1 or higher. Those turnovers are coming down, and the assists are going up, so he's trending in the right direction, but he's not where he needs to be right now. And the field goal percentage, last year, BYU's field goal percentage was wildly high. Like unsustainable, unrepeatable, really. I think their field goal percentage leader was something like 60-something%, and he wasn't even a big guy. The leader this year is 51.6%. That's not great. So the shooting needs to improve, and then the turnovers need to go down for BYU to realize what Kevin Young envisioned as an NCAA tournament team. Honestly, I would be happy with an NIT team or whatever other postseason tournament there is. Because from what I've seen, they put up a really good fight against Ole Miss early in the season. They got blown to smithereens by a Providence team in Rhode Island on their first true road trip. And to give you an idea, Providence is currently 10-10 on the season. Yeah. And then the shellacking they received at the hands of Houston, but BYU's not alone. So let's kind of segue that into University of Utah. So since that game, University of Utah started out 0-3 in conference against Baylor, Texas Tech, and Iowa State. 3 very big guns in the Big 12. They bounced back against Oklahoma State, TCU, and eventually BYU. 3-game winning streak. They were 3-3 in conference, overperforming as far as where I'm sitting. But since then, they've crashed back down to earth. BYU lost to Houston by 31 in Houston. Utah went to Houston and said, we'll do you 3 better, and lost by 34. They almost got doubled up. And then they went home against a Baylor team who is middle of the pack, Big 12, around where BYU should be, and then got blown out 76-61. Utah has Gabe Madsen and little else, from what I've seen. And that's expected. This team, University of Utah basketball, hasn't been any good since Rick Majerus retired. Or he didn't retire. He went to Rhode Island or something, didn't he? Something like that. St. Louis? No, it was the Billikens. Yeah, he went to St. Louis. But 3 wins is already, I would almost qualify it as a successful season in their first season in the Big 12. The rest of their year isn't looking very good. They've got 3 winnable games coming up against Cincinnati, Oklahoma State, and Colorado. But after that, they've got West Virginia, Kansas, Kansas State, Arizona, Arizona State, West Virginia again, and BYU. Oof. That's as much of a murderer's row as there could be. And the BYU game is in Provo. Wow. So there you go. Utah started out really well. They started out better than I think anybody thought they would. They only lost to Mississippi State by 5. Lost to St. Mary's by 11. Lost to Iowa by 7. So really competitive games. But then Big 12 play started. They lost to Baylor by 25. Lost to Texas Tech by 28. Lost to Iowa State by 23. Whew. So they've got a lot to improve on, for sure. Craig Smith did it at Utah State. He's finding it very hard to do at Utah. Yeah. So let's look at the standings in the Big 12 really quick. So the standings in the Big 12 read out Houston, Iowa State, and Arizona are at the top. Everybody expected that. Texas Tech and Kansas are right behind them along with Baylor. But then you got BYU sitting at 4-4 in conference. That's not bad. That is still within striking distance. And then Utah is right behind that cluster of BYU, Central Florida, and West Virginia at 3 wins in conference. The difference is the schedule is going down the stretch. BYU knows what it's like to play in the Big 12. Granted, it's only 1 season, but they've been there. They know. Utah has played in the Pac-12 where, other than Arizona and Arizona State, it was really soft. And you can't yell at me for that because it's the truth. UCLA, terrible. USC, awful. Washington, even worse. Washington State, they play basketball. You know, that's the feeling. So that's where we're sitting. I think BYU has a chance to make some noise. They had that upset against Kansas last year. It tips off this coming Tuesday against Baylor. They've got to start stringing these wins together. It doesn't have to be pretty. Doesn't have to be a 20-point victory. Just need the wins. All right, so let's move on to Dynasty Warriors. Yes, video game review time. Last 3 minutes here. So Dynasty Warriors, when I was growing up, and my family can attest to this, is what I would play ad nauseum. We would have summer break, and anytime anybody asks, oh, where's Matt? Oh, he's playing Dynasty Warriors. That was Dynasty Warriors 3, 4, and 5. There are also other games in there, Dynasty Tactics 1 and 2, your Romance of the Three Kingdoms games. But I was all over this game series in this time period. I have the books, The Three Kingdoms by Luo Guanzong. Really good books, by the way. If you need a good read, pick that series up. Good stuff. Not necessarily historically accurate, but really good. And like the best look back at that time of the early Han or late Han that there is. But I drifted away. 6, 7, and 8. Not really. I didn't really play any of them. I didn't really watch anything of it. I played the Romance of the Three Kingdoms games still, but I wasn't into that hack and slash stuff. And then Dynasty Warriors 9 came out, and I was very interested in Dynasty Warriors 9. In 2018, it came out on PS4, Xbox One, the gamut. It was terrible. I was excited about it because they added open world. But it looked like and it felt like they didn't know what that meant. And it was just a terrible game. Unlocks were so hard to get, and this is coming from somebody who played Dynasty Warriors 3. And Dynasty Warriors 3, I put in hundreds of hours, and I think I unlocked 90% of the game. So I was used to a tough road to hoe, but you have to evolve with the times, and Dynasty Warriors tried that with the open world, but then fell flat on their face with everything else. And it was too far away for you to run to do things. The officer relationship thing was weird, but it just wasn't a good game. The average score was 4.4 out of 10. The Metascore on Metacritic, which just is a conglomeration of all reviews, 65 out of 100, not good. So that is the soup that Dynasty Warriors Origins was diving into. And boy, howdy, Dynasty Warriors Origins is incredible. I love it. You play a story mode. You play as a peacekeeper, basically, is what they're called. And It's so much fun. There's battle tactics. There's great shields you have to break through with different battle tactics, things to do. There's magic from the yellow turbans. It's so much fun, and it's different because you have different weapons that you can use. So in the past, if you wanted to use a different weapon, you had to play as a different character in the game. Well, now, as you progress through the story, you unlock more and more weapons. And then with those weapons, you unlock moves you can do. You unlock different characters you interact with. This game is what I wanted Dynasty Warriors to be post Dynasty Warriors 7. It took them a while, but it got here. To give you an idea of how different it is, right now on Metacritic, as I'm recording this, it's an 80 out of 100 and an 8 out of 10. So they doubled up their out of 10 scoring, and they added 20 points to their Metascore. That's incredible. So if you want a very fun, button-mashing, you against an army, which is what the Dynasty Warriors ethos is you're a one-man army, this is the game for you. Get it. All right, so that's the show this week, everybody. Thank you all so much for listening. I went over time a little bit. I hope you'll forgive me. But next week, Super Bowl preview. And then as we get closer to MLS getting into their preseason, I'll have a season preview for Real Salt Lake as well. Their season kicks off in Costa Rica for the CONCACAF Nations Club thing that they're doing. Whatever. That kicks off on February 14th. But anyway, that is what is to come next week. But thank you all for being here this week, and I'll see you next week when we spelunk back into the Mad Cave.